Sign the waiver for grandmother's inheritance, Madison, or my next call will be to summon you to court. Don't make me do this the hard way, sis. My stepsister Olivia's voice cut through the silence of my office, cold and demanding. She tapped impatiently on my polished walnut desk, her perfect manicure beating an impatient rhythm. She was flanked by 3 lawyers in expensive suits, their faces impassive. They had already opened their briefcases, and the official papers were spread before me like a formal warning, leaving me little choice. My name is Madison Vaughn, and I am 32 years old. I run my own design bureau here in Seattle, Washington. I hadn't shied away from life. I had spent the last 10 years dedicated to creating innovative, award-winning sustainable buildings. I managed complex projects and led teams of dozens every single day. But now, looking into Olivia's cold eyes, I realized, all my achievements, my entire career, my whole reputation, it meant absolutely nothing to her. The only thing that mattered now was that our grandmother, Margaret, had passed away 3 days ago. And here Olivia stood, in my office, her presence violating the silence of my workday. She had come to take what she firmly believed belonged to her, and only her, by birthright. I slowly set my mug down on the desk. The coffee inside was already cold. Its aroma, usually so invigorating and familiar, now seemed foreign and bitter. I forced myself to focus on the papers they had so confidently spread out before me. It was a flawless, cold, and perfectly drafted inheritance waiver. I had to admit, her lawyers were worth their money. One signature from me, given under this pressure, and I would forfeit any and all claims to Margaret's estate. This document made Olivia the sole heiress to a fortune that experts valued at no less than $6 million. And it wasn't just about the money. It included the magnificent waterfront estate on Mercer Island, with its private dock and breathtaking views of Lake Washington. It also included the collection of rare vintage cars that grandmother had spent decades curating, and, of course, the massive investment portfolio that didn't just support her but afforded her a lavish lifestyle. You always knew this day would come, Maddie, Olivia continued. She didn't raise her voice, but it was devoid of any warmth or grief. Her blue eyes were as cold and gray as the Seattle sky on a rainy November day. Margaret might have liked playing our perfect family. She liked pretending you were her real granddaughter, but blood is blood. And my blood is real. The court will understand that difference very quickly when it learns that you are, essentially, just an addition. That you're an outsider. One of her 3 lawyers, a stern man with a perfectly tied silver tie and graying temples, leaned forward. Ms. Vaughn, he addressed me, his voice as sterile as his expensive suit. Let's be frank. This is a more than generous offer. Your sister could immediately contest the will based on your adoption status and, he paused, let's say, the high probability of undue influence on an elderly person in her final years. It was a naked threat. She is prepared to spare you a long, public, and, believe me, extremely humiliating court battle. All that is required of you is to acknowledge the natural order of inheritance. I deliberately turned to my coffee machine in the corner of the office. The familiar, steady hum of the machine and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans, this small ritual instantly restored my composure. Olivia had always underestimated me. Our entire lives. She saw my adoption not as a gift, but as a weakness, a stigma, a perpetual sign that I was unwanted. She never could, or perhaps never wanted to, understand the main point: Margaret chose me. Our grandmother saw something in that scared 8-year-old girl in the orphanage. Something that made her go through all the circles of bureaucratic hell to bring me into the family, despite the furious objections of Olivia's mother. Can I offer anyone some coffee? I asked in a deliberately calm, almost social tone, picking up a cup. I have an excellent blend from Colombia. Margaret brought it for me last month. Said it helps to think clearly. The mention of our grandmother got to her. Olivia's face contorted with irritation, her mask of the perfect businesswoman cracking. I didn't come for a tasting, Maddie. Stop this circus and just sign the papers. I ignored her outburst. The sound of the coffee machine releasing steam seemed deafening in the tense silence. I watched as the thick, caramel stream of espresso filled the delicate porcelain cup. Grandmother had taught me to appreciate this process. We had spent countless evenings in her vast library, discussing everything under the sun over coffee, from her first business risks to my most daring architectural projects. Those conversations, her wisdom, her support, that was my real inheritance. And it was worth far more than the 6 million Olivia was so desperately hunting. Of course, I said at last, returning to my seat with the steaming cup of coffee. I took a small, calming sip. I perfectly understand your desire. You want to close this matter quickly and without unnecessary drama. Divide the assets, as one should. I allowed myself a warm, almost sympathetic smile, addressed to the lawyers. I noticed how they immediately averted their eyes and shifted uncomfortably in their chairs under Olivia's heavy, impatient gaze. I will make sure my lawyers contact yours tomorrow morning. We'll get everything squared away. The tension in Olivia's shoulders visibly eased. She had won. She mistook my calmness and quick concession for an unconditional surrender. She had no idea what a surprise tomorrow would bring her. Revelations that would completely destroy all her ideas about our grandmother's true estate. The years that led us to this office were full of signs and hints. But Olivia preferred to ignore them. While she was completely absorbed in her social life, endless parties, spending Margaret's money on designer bags and exotic vacations, I was building a completely different relationship with our grandmother. It was a bond that went far beyond obligatory Sunday family dinners and Christmas visits. It all started when I was still in college. I was studying architecture at the University of Washington, UW, right here in Seattle. During one of our weekly coffee meetings, Margaret casually mentioned that she was looking into investing in commercial real estate in Europe. Unlike Olivia, who would have yawned and buried her face in her phone at this point, I lit up. I started asking questions about market analysis, zoning, urban planning aspects, and the logistics of such projects. I saw her eyes light up when she realized I wasn't just nodding politely, but actually understood what she was talking about. Most people see buildings as just concrete boxes, Maddie, she said then, stirring sugar into her espresso. But you see the same thing in them that I do. You understand that they are part of a huge system. A living organism connected to the economy, culture, and, most importantly, human needs. One such conversation flowed into the next, and then into a weekly tradition. Soon, I was no longer just a student, I became her trusted advisor. I helped her analyze international markets, compiling detailed reports for her on property values and development potential in London, Barcelona, and even Singapore. Olivia never paid the slightest attention when such discussions happened during our rare family gatherings. She was too busy scrolling through her social media feed or loudly complaining about her latest drama with her friends. Maddie was always such a bore, always with her laptop, she would dismissively remark when Margaret tried to involve her in our conversations about foreign investments. "Grandma, I don't understand why you even bother us with these boring business talks at dinner. It's so tiring." Margaret would meet my gaze across the table, and I would see something flicker in her eyes. Perhaps it was disappointment. Or maybe, a quiet but fundamental realization of Olivia's true nature, which she was only beginning to fully accept. The real turning point came 2 years ago, during the celebration of Olivia's birthday. She had demanded a grandiose party at the most exclusive panoramic view restaurant in downtown Seattle, insisting that Margaret pay for the entire table, including drinks for a dozen of her friends. When the waiter brought the bill for a hefty 4-figure sum, Olivia didn't even glance at the total. She just lazily pushed the folder toward our grandmother. "Thanks, Grandma," she tossed out carelessly, returning to her phone. "You're the best." Later that evening, as I was helping Margaret into the car, she was unusually quiet. I drove her Bentley while she stared out at the city lights. "She didn't even ask about my health once," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "Not once the entire evening. She never asks how things are at the company, never offers to help with anything. She just takes it for granted that the money tap will never be turned off." That night, I drove her home to her mansion on Mercer Island. She asked me to stay. We talked for hours in her huge, dark wood-paneled study. It was then that she showed me documents I had never seen before. These weren't the papers that lay in her usual safe. These were property deeds, offshore trust agreements, and asset maps that painted a picture of wealth far exceeding the 6 million Olivia was screaming about today. It was a completely different, dizzying reality. The assets here, in the States, the ones Olivia knows about. Margaret paused, her voice growing quieter, more contemplative. They are just the tip of the iceberg, Maddie. The storefront. I was always thinking about the future. She looked somewhere into the distance, beyond the dark windows of her study. About what legacy really means. And about which of you two truly understands the responsibility that comes with great wealth. In the following months, our conversations became more frequent and more candid. Margaret began to reveal the full extent of her international assets to me. She explained how, for decades, in secret from everyone, she had built a global real estate portfolio worth over $20 million. These weren't just numbers. This was prime real estate in London's financial district, luxury seaside residential complexes in Barcelona, and entire floors of commercial skyscrapers in Singapore's business hub. Olivia sees money as something to be spent immediately, she remarked one afternoon as we were reviewing profit reports. But you understand that wealth is a tool. It's leverage to create something lasting, something that will remain after we are gone. The transformation in our relationship was gradual but irreversible. What had begun as simple investment discussions between a grandmother and granddaughter grew into something much deeper. Margaret wasn't just sharing secrets with me. She was preparing me. Preparing me to inherit not just her wealth, but her vision, her business acumen, and the philosophy she lived by. 6 months before her death, Margaret called me into her study. She called it an important conversation. I immediately knew this was not an exaggeration. The room was piled with stacks of legal documents, and her personal lawyer, James Harrison, was already on a video conference call from his office in London. Madison, Margaret began, her voice firm despite the frailty that had appeared due to her declining health. I need you to understand something about your sister. Something I refused to admit for too long. She took a folder from the desk and slid it toward me. Inside were printouts, emails and text messages. It was Olivia's correspondence with her over the past year. I scanned them and my heart sank. They were all focused exclusively on money. Requests for a small transfer for shopping. Demands to pay for a vacation in Ibiza. Disgruntled complaints that the limit on her credit card, which Margaret paid, was too low. Not one question. Not one "Grandma, how are you feeling?" Not a single word of thanks for anything other than a financial handout. She sent me this last week, Margaret said, her voice flat but with an edge of steel. She pointed to the last message from Olivia. It was a sharp, almost demanding request for an advance on her future inheritance. She urgently needed a new Range Rover. The message was written with such casual entitlement, as if she were just ordering a morning latte. She doesn't even sign off with love, Margaret added quietly. The contrast was staggering when she opened another folder, which contained my correspondence with her over the same period. My messages were full of questions about her doctor's visits. Offers to stop by after work and bring groceries. Thank you notes for the wise advice she gave me on my most complex architectural projects. The difference in tone, in content, in intent wasn't just obvious, it was colossal. I've made some decisions, Maddie, Margaret said, pushing a thick, heavy, leather-bound stack of documents across the desk to me. James Harrison nodded silently on the screen, confirming the gravity of the moment. The international real estate. The offshore accounts. The trusts I've been building and funding for the last 15 years, all of it. She took a deep breath. I am transferring it all to you. I stared at the papers in shock. My hands were shaking. These were ownership documents for entire buildings in London, worth millions. Trust agreements for commercial properties in Barcelona. Details of investment portfolios managed through banks in Singapore. The scale of it was overwhelming. It was a fortune many times greater than the 6 million Olivia knew about. Margaret, I can't accept this, I protested, my voice breaking. This is too much. It's not right. Olivia is your biological granddaughter. Grandmother's face hardened. She leaned toward me, her gaze piercing me. Biology does not determine character, Madison, she said firmly. Year after year, you have shown me respect, sincere, genuine care, and a deep understanding of responsibility. And Olivia. She nodded disdainfully at the folder with her messages. Olivia has shown me that she sees me not as a grandmother, but as a walking bank account. James Harrison, Margaret's London-based lawyer, still on the video call, took over. He began to methodically explain the complex legal structure she had so carefully built. All the domestic assets, the 6 million, the visible wealth Olivia knew about, would go to her through the traditional will that would be read. But the international assets, the real wealth, had already been legally transferred to me. The transfer was completed through a complex but completely legal series of offshore trusts and foreign corporations registered in my name. This has been planned for the last 3 years, Harrison explained in his crisp British accent. Every transaction, every asset transfer, has been legal, impeccably documented, and structured to withstand any, even the most aggressive, challenge. Miss Olivia's lawyers will find nothing unusual in the domestic inheritance because it will go through the standard probate procedures here in the States. They will only see what they are allowed to see. As I left Margaret's mansion that evening, clutching the briefcase of documents, she stopped me at the door and squeezed my hand tightly. Her palm, once strong, now felt frail, but her grip was firm. You are the granddaughter of my heart, Maddie, she said quietly, and in her eyes, I saw something more than just love. I saw pride. Remember, blood doesn't make a family. Love, respect, and loyalty do. And so now, sitting in my own office, looking at Olivia and her 3 predatory lawyers, I finished my cold coffee. I fully understood that tomorrow morning, when the wills were read, the full scale of Margaret's final lesson would be revealed. A lesson about the fundamental difference between blind entitlement and a true, earned legacy. The next morning arrived with a typical Seattle autumn drizzle. It was the kind of weather, gray skies and fine rain, that made the city cozy and conducive to contemplation. I had spent most of the night sleepless, reviewing the documents Margaret had entrusted to me over and over. I checked every letter, every number, ensuring every detail was ready for what was about to happen today. Olivia arrived at the Harrison and Partners office at 9 a.m. sharp. Her confidence was almost palpable. She strode through the luxurious marble lobby of the downtown Seattle skyscraper as if she already owned the building. She brought the same team of 3 lawyers from yesterday, plus 2 junior associates who scurried behind, laden with additional briefcases. She clearly expected this to be a quick, routine procedure, a simple formality of dividing Margaret's assets in complete accordance with her, Olivia's, expectations. I appreciate you deciding to be reasonable, Maddie, Olivia said as we rode the silent, high-speed elevator to the 19th floor. She was wearing a new, defiantly expensive designer dress, likely bought on credit against the anticipated massive inheritance windfall. I know Margaret was fond of you, in her own way. But family law, as you understand, is very clear about priorities. Blood is blood. Her lead lawyer, the same stern man with graying temples from yesterday's meeting, humphed approvingly at me. Your sister is being extremely generous, Ms. Vaughn, he drawled. In my experience, many biological heirs in her position would have gone for a full lawsuit. If only to contest the will and ensure that adopted family members don't receive a cent. I just smiled politely, watching the floor numbers change on the display. They had no idea where they were really going. They thought this was the office of a run-of-the-mill local notary. But we were heading to the main conference room of Harrison and Partners, the international firm from which James Harrison personally oversaw Margaret's entire global real estate empire. Olivia and her team had spent their time studying Washington state inheritance law. But they had never bothered, it would never have occurred to them, to research international law, offshore trust structures, or holding companies registered in Singapore. They were walking into battle knowing the rules for only half the playing field. Harrison met us personally at the entrance to his spacious corner office. Floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows offered a breathtaking view of Puget Sound and the distant silhouettes of the Olympic Mountains. James Harrison was a distinguished, impeccably dressed man in his 60s. Every gesture exuded the meticulous precision and calm confidence of a man who had managed complex international deals for decades. His assistant silently served us coffee in elegant bone china cups as we settled around the massive dark glass conference table. "Well, ladies, gentlemen." Before we proceed with the official reading, Harrison began, opening a thick, leather-bound folder. "I want to ensure that everyone present clearly understands the scope and structure of Miss Margaret Vaughan's estate planning." He looked up and glanced at each of Olivia's lawyers in turn. "There are the domestic assets, which will go through the standard, traditional probate process here in the state of Washington. And there are the international assets, which are governed by entirely separate, independent legal structures." Olivia's lead lawyer leaned forward impatiently, clearly wanting to speed things up. "Mr. Harrison, we are fully prepared for any potential complications. Our exhaustive research indicates the estate consists primarily of the Mercer Island residence, the vintage car collection, and a domestic investment portfolio. The total estimated value is approximately $6 million. Harrison nodded thoughtfully, as if agreeing with a student who had given a correct but incomplete answer. "Yes, you are perfectly correct. Those are the domestic assets. And they do, indeed, according to the will, go in their entirety to Miss Olivia as the biological heir, naturally, minus applicable taxes and administrative fees." He paused dramatically, his gaze slowly shifting from the lawyer to Olivia. "However," he continued in an even tone, "that sum represents approximately 25% of Miss Margaret Vaughan's total estate." A stunning silence instantly fell over the room. The only sound was the ticking of the expensive clock on the wall. The mask of triumphant confidence on Olivia's face wavered. She frowned, her brain clearly trying to process this information. Her expression shifted from victorious to bewildered. What do you mean? What other 25%? Miss Margaret was very forward-thinking," Harrison continued in the same flat, almost academic tone, as if delivering a lecture. "Over the last 15 years, she diversified her assets, creating what we call a global holding. The list includes key properties in the City of London, commercial spaces in Barcelona, and several residential skyscrapers in Singapore. By the most conservative estimates, their value exceeds $20 million. One of Olivia's lawyers immediately jumped at the bait. "That's completely irrelevant," he almost shouted. "Even if these holdings exist, they are part of the total estate. The right of blood takes precedence." Harrison slowly shook his head, as if disappointed in a poor student. "And that is where you are mistaken," he corrected gently. "They are not part of the estate. And they haven't been for some time." He paused, letting the words sink into the silence. "All of these assets were restructured and legally transferred into the full, irrevocable ownership of Miss Madison Vaughan. This transfer was completed 3 years ago. Everything is legal, documented, and registered in the respective jurisdictions. Miss Margaret retained only management rights, but not ownership." The air in the room seemed to thicken. All the color drained from Olivia's face. She stared at Harrison, her eyes wide. This was no longer bewilderment. This was pure, animalistic terror. "You're lying," her voice cracked into a shriek. "You're all lying. This is a fake. Grandmother would have told me." Harrison didn't even seem to notice her outburst. He impassively picked up another document from the table. It was a personal letter, notarized. "On the contrary. Miss Margaret was crystal clear in her motives," he said, putting on his glasses. He quoted, "I do not wish for my life's work to be squandered on." He paused, searching for the word in the text, "on fleeting whims and conspicuous consumption." He took off his glasses and looked directly at Olivia. She wanted her legacy to build, not just be spent. Olivia's lead lawyer, pale as a sheet, was scribbling furiously in his notepad. He shot to his feet, his professional mask gone, revealing rage and desperation. "This is a farce," he roared, slamming his palm on the table. "We demand immediate access to all of these trusts of yours. We will contest this. We will prove that an elderly woman was pressured. We will prove she was mentally incompetent." Harrison calmly nodded to his assistant. The assistant immediately placed several thick, imposing, leather-bound volumes on the table in front of Olivia's lawyers. "Here's everything you might need for your investigation," Harrison explained calmly. "Miss Margaret Vaughn's complete medical history for the last 5 years, demonstrating absolute clarity of mind and no cognitive impairments. 3 separate psychological evaluations from leading specialists, confirming her full mental capacity at the time of all transactions. Notarized video recordings in which she personally and in detail explains her motives and decisions." He paused, picking up a small digital voice recorder. "And finally, the audio recordings. Numerous conversations with Miss Olivia, which, unfortunately, served as the catalyst for this asset protection plan." While Olivia's legal team frantically dug into the documents, flipping through pages of medical terms, I found myself thinking about those evenings. About those countless hours in Margaret's study, when, instead of asking for money, I was absorbing knowledge about international markets and the ethics of wealth management. She wasn't just preparing me to inherit her fortune. She was preparing me to understand and accept the full weight of that responsibility. The audio recordings were devastating. Harrison played them with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon. Each short clip exposed a new, ugly layer of Olivia's entitlement and her icy disregard for her grandmother's well-being. "This file," Harrison announced, his voice seeming to fill the entire room, "was recorded during Miss Olivia's birthday dinner 2 years ago." He pressed play. Olivia's voice, young, bright, and irritatingly carefree, hit the tense silence of the conference room. "Come on, Grandma. It's just money. You can't take it with you when you go, right? I deserve to enjoy life while I'm young. Buy me that car." Olivia turned paper white, listening to her own words. Her lips trembled. That's taken out of context. I was kidding." But the recording continued mercilessly. Margaret's quiet, clearly weary voice responded. "I understand your desire to enjoy life, Olivia. But I'm just curious, have you ever thought about where this money comes from? Or what will happen when it suddenly runs out?" Olivia's laugh on the recording was sharp and dismissive. "Huh. That's your job to worry about, not mine. I'm not some boring architect nerd like Maddie, after all." Harrison pressed pause. The room was so quiet you could hear the ventilation hum. "Miss Margaret kept very detailed records of her family interactions for the last 5 years, he said in a level tone. "Would you care to hear more?" Without waiting for an answer, he played the next file. It was a phone call. Olivia was demanding money for an unplanned European vacation and was openly angry when Margaret gently suggested that she could, perhaps, get a job and contribute at least part of the sum herself. "I don't even understand why you're making this so complicated," her recorded voice complained, full of irritation. "You're rich. I'm your granddaughter. End of story. Just transfer me the money." With each new audio file, Olivia's legal team grew quieter and quieter. Their initial aggression was replaced by grim focus. There was nothing criminally indictable in Olivia's behavior. But taken together, the recordings painted a crystal-clear, devastating portrait. It was the portrait of a person who viewed her grandmother exclusively as an endless source of funding, not as a living human being deserving of basic respect, time, or care. "These recordings cover the last 3 years, Harrison explained, turning off the recorder. The silence that followed Olivia's voice was deafening. "They demonstrate a clear, consistent pattern of transactional interaction," he continued, "which deeply troubled Miss Margaret. She began to seriously fear that by leaving her main fortune to Miss Olivia, she would simply be signing the death warrant for her life's work. She was afraid it would all be squandered on thoughtless and impulsive spending. For good measure, Harrison played one last file. "And this, for contrast," he said, "is a typical conversation with Miss Madison." My voice and Margaret's voice filled the room. We were animatedly discussing sustainable building practices in seismic zones. Then I was asking about her latest visit to the cardiologist. Then I was wholeheartedly thanking her for her advice on a complex contract she had helped me analyze the previous week. The difference wasn't just striking. It was undeniable and humiliating for the other side. Miss Margaret often mentioned in her personal notes Madison's sincere interest in her life, not just her wallet, Harrison noted, nodding at one of the volumes. She was the only family member who ever asked about her test results or offered to go with her to the doctor when her health began to decline. Olivia's lead lawyer, pale but still trying to fight, jumped up, scrambling for any legal foothold. Even if these international transfers were technically legal," he blurted out, "we can challenge them on the basis of emotional manipulation." She was clearly pressured. "There was no manipulation," Harrison cut him off, his voice flat and cold. "It brooked no argument. Miss Margaret personally initiated this entire estate planning process. She independently consulted with multiple independent law firms in 3 countries. She voluntarily underwent all the psychiatric evaluations we recommended. And she meticulously considered, weighed, and refined this plan over several years. This was not a hasty decision, gentlemen. This was a carefully orchestrated strategy." Harrison picked up one last document from the table. It was a handwritten letter, in Margaret's neat but no longer steady script. The lawyer's voice was perfectly even as he read her final, parting words. "It is with great regret that I must acknowledge that blood ties guarantee neither love, nor respect, nor responsibility. Madison, through her character and her actions, has shown me what kind of person I want to entrust my life's work to. She understands that true wealth is not a prize to be thoughtlessly consumed, but an immense trust to be wisely managed." Olivia shot up so abruptly that her heavy chair screeched back on the hardwood floor. Her face, pale a moment ago, was now crimson and distorted with rage. "This is absurd. This is insane," she screamed. "Are you telling me that this outsider, this adopted girl, gets $20 million, and I, her real, blood granddaughter, get the scraps?" "You receive all the domestic assets," Harrison corrected her calmly, as if explaining to a child. "The Mercer Island property, the car collection, and the domestic portfolio. The total value, as your team said, is $6 million. Let's be frank, miss, the vast majority of people on this planet would consider that a more than substantial inheritance." But Olivia was no longer listening to him. Reason was of no interest to her. She was trapped in her own humiliation and fury. She manipulated her. Olivia shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's been brainwashing Grandma for years. She turned her against me, against her real family. This is fraud. This is a scam." Harrison's expression didn't flicker for a second. It remained a perfect mask of professional courtesy. But in his eyes, I could clearly see a cold, icy disgust. "Miss Margaret's decision-making process is documented with microscopic precision," he clipped out. 3 independent law firms in 3 different countries verified and certified every transaction. 2 leading medical specialists confirmed her absolute sanity and clarity of mind until her final day. The legal structure of this plan, miss." He paused, searching for the word, "is bulletproof." A heavy silence fell over the conference room again. It was broken only by the panicked, frightened whispers of Olivia's lawyers as they frantically flipped through documents, realizing the battle was lost before it had even begun. They finally understood what I had realized long ago. Margaret hadn't just transferred her assets to me. She had meticulously orchestrated this very moment. She had ensured that Olivia would learn the truth about her real place in this family in the most public, most painful, and most humiliating way possible. But Harrison wasn't finished. This wasn't even the end. He calmly pressed a button on the conference console. The large black screen that dominated one of the walls silently came to life. The face of Marcus Blackwood, the firm's London partner, appeared. He looked refreshed and briskly British, with the Thames visible behind him in the panoramic window. "Good morning, all. A quick confirmation from London. We have received the directive signed by Ms. Vaughan," Marcus said clearly. "The portfolio has officially transferred to her operational control. We are just coordinating schedules and awaiting her green light to launch Phase 2. The Barcelona expansion." Olivia looked as if her legs were about to give out. She literally clung to the edge of the table to stay in her chair. Her makeup was streaked with tears. "Phase 2, she whispered. "Yes," Harrison confirmed, disconnecting the call. Marcus Blackwood vanished as suddenly as he had appeared. Miss Margaret didn't build these assets for them to gather dust. They were built for growth. She was confident that Madison was the only person who could grow her legacy, not just preserve it. Up to this point, I had sat in silence. But now I had to say something. "None of this was my goal, Olivia," I said quietly, looking directly into her eyes. "Until her very last day, grandmother waited for one phone call from you. A simple call where you didn't ask for money. She just wanted you to ask how she was feeling. Just once." Her face twisted. "It's you," she cried out. "It's all you. You worked her. You stole my family from me, you fake." "I didn't steal her," my voice remained calm, but firm as steel. "I listened to her. I sat with her when she was lonely, and we talked about her business because it interested her. And where were you? You were always bored, Olivia. You were insufferably bored if the conversation didn't revolve around your bills and your desires." "Enough." Harrison raised a hand, cutting off the impending hysterical fit. "There is one final item." He slowly extracted a slim, personal envelope from his folder. On it, in Margaret's handwriting, was a single word, "Olivia. Miss Margaret left this for you. And my instructions were very clear, to hand it over only after the full status of the international assets was disclosed." Her fingers trembled as she snatched the envelope and clumsily tore it open. I watched her eyes dart feverishly over the lines. I knew what it said. In it were Margaret's words that $6 million was a more than generous starting capital for Olivia to finally build her own life. But her life's work, her empire, she couldn't give it to someone who confused wealth with an endless party. She wrote that perhaps this painful blow and this disappointment would teach Olivia what her grandmother's boundless love could not, that family is not a birthright. It is a privilege that must be earned daily with respect, loyalty, and care. Olivia didn't finish reading. She made a guttural, furious, animal sound and crumpled the letter in her fist. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with expensive mascara, but they were not tears of grief. It was pure, powerless rage at a complete and crushing defeat. Her lead lawyer, pale as a ghost, hastily got to his feet, gathering his papers. "We will challenge this," he shouted, trying to reclaim a shred of authority. "We will fight, we will investigate, we will file suits in international courts." His voice was loud, but in this quiet, expensive room, it sounded ridiculously hollow. He knew it was over. They all knew. Harrison allowed himself an icy, barely perceptible smile. "You are, of course, free to try," he said. "But let me be clear. To contest these trusts, you will have to wage 3 simultaneous, full-scale legal battles. In London. In Barcelona. And in Singapore. We've run the numbers." He leaned forward, his voice becoming quieter but more piercing. "The advance payments to international lawyers alone will be enough to completely drain the 6 million Miss Olivia is set to receive. It would be financial suicide. It was a trap. A perfectly designed, merciless trap. Margaret knew Olivia wouldn't be able to resist the temptation to fight. And she had turned the only money Olivia was supposed to get into poisonous bait. Margaret had used her own greed to utterly destroy her. My assets, meanwhile, were protected by a labyrinth of international law, unreachable by her anger. Olivia's lawyers froze. They silently, with ashen faces, began to gather their papers. The game was over, and they knew it. Olivia turned to me, her face a mask of pure, impotent hatred. "You didn't win, Maddie," she hissed, her voice trembling. "I'll tell everyone who you are. I'll prove you're a thief who tricked a sick, old woman. I will destroy you, even if it takes everything." I calmly held her gaze. There was no fear. Only a deep, bitter exhaustion. "Margaret saw right through you, Olivia." "That's all," I replied. "She saw me, and she saw you. It's not that I did anything. It's that you did nothing. For years, you showed her exactly who you are. She just, finally, believed you." The truth, cold and hard as the marble floor beneath our feet, filled the room. Olivia hadn't lost a $20 million empire. She had lost her grandmother, who, until her last day, had waited for a single drop of warmth from her, and instead only received bills to be paid. The elevator doors closed, carrying her and her shattered legal army away. Silence settled in Harrison's office. I walked to the window. The storm over Seattle had passed. The clouds were breaking, and Puget Sound glittered under the sudden sun. The horizon seemed endless, full of possibilities I could barely comprehend. "She would have been so proud of how you handled yourself, Madison," Harrison said quietly from behind me. "She knew her legacy was in safe hands." I nodded, feeling the full weight of that legacy settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just wealth. It was a mantle. A burden of purpose that Margaret had placed on me. And now, I had to carry it. 6 months later. I stood in the conference room of my new London office, looking out at the same Thames I had seen on Marcus Blackwood's screen. Harrison had just called with the latest news. As Margaret had predicted, Olivia couldn't stop. Blinded by rage, she had launched her world war. She filed lawsuits in all 3 jurisdictions. And today, in Singapore, the court had dismissed her final appeal. This pointless vendetta had cost her everything. The $6 million Margaret had left her was incinerated in the furnace of international legal fees. The house on Mercer Island. The cars. Everything went to pay the lawyer's bills. She was left with nothing. Worse, she was left with outstanding debts to 3 law firms on 3 continents. All she had left was her pride and closets full of designer clothes. The legal battle was over. The verdict from the High Court in Great Britain was dry, official, and final. It confirmed that Margaret was of sound mind, and all asset transfers were carried out in strict compliance with the law. No evidence of manipulation or pressure, on which Olivia had built her entire case, was found. This obsession had cost her everything. The $6 million Margaret left her was completely burned up in this international legal fire. The Mercer Island house was sold to pay the London lawyer's bills. The car collection was auctioned off to cover the expenses in Singapore. Her rage and pride wouldn't let her stop in time. She fought an unwinnable battle on 3 continents, and she lost. During this time, I was in London. I looked out at the Thames from the panoramic windows of my new office. Here, at the European headquarters of Vanguard Properties, life was booming. The assets Margaret had entrusted to me were not just being preserved, they were growing. The project in Barcelona, which Marcus was overseeing, was gaining momentum, and the London properties were showing record quarterly profits. My assistant entered the office with an unusually cautious expression. "Ms. Vaughn? I'm sorry to bother you, but Olivia is in the reception. She doesn't have an appointment, but she doesn't look well and is begging to see you." I went downstairs. Sitting on the edge of a sofa in the reception area was not the ice queen I knew. Before me was a different person. Her expensive, status symbol clothes were gone, replaced by something simple, almost rumpled. That aura of confidence and superiority that had always been her armor had evaporated. She looked devastated. "Madison," her voice was barely audible when she saw me. We sat in a small meeting room. Her hands lay on the table, and I could see them trembling slightly. "I lost," she whispered, staring at the table. The last appeal. Everything. I have no more money. The lawyers. She swallowed, and a tear rolled down her cheek. I can't pay my rent next month. I looked at her and, for the first time in my life, I felt no anger or gloating toward her. Only a cold emptiness. All her pride had been washed away by real fear and, it seemed to me, genuine remorse. What do you want from me, Olivia? I was wrong, she whispered, lifting her tear-stained eyes to me. About everything. About you. About grandmother. I really thought I was entitled to everything by birthright. I never. Her voice broke. I never thought about just earning her love. I just waited. I remembered what we were like as children, before her envy and pride destroyed the fragile bond we had. Margaret left me a letter. For you, I said. I went to my safe and took out an envelope that Harrison had given me after the will reading, with the words, "She said you would know when to open it." I saw Olivia's eyes widen. She knew this day would come, I said. She knew you would go to the very end. And that you would lose everything. I unfolded the sheet and began to read Margaret's last words aloud. Madison, if you are reading this letter to Olivia, it means she has hit rock bottom. It means she has finally learned the cruel lesson that I, in life, could not teach her with my love. But no matter what, she is still my granddaughter. And I hope that this experience, this pain, will not break her, but change her. I hope she finally understands that family is not a birthright, but a great privilege that must be earned every day. The letter was not just a sentence. It contained Margaret's final instructions. She had arranged for a small, strictly controlled trust fund to be established. Its sole purpose was to provide Olivia with the most basic living expenses, payment for a modest apartment and a transit pass. But there was one harsh condition. The payments were conditional on her demonstrating genuine, documented change, through community service and proof of personal growth. She never wanted to destroy you, Olivia, I explained, gently folding the letter. She just desperately wanted you to understand the difference. The difference between earning something through your own hard work, and simply expecting it by right of birth. At that moment, Olivia finally broke. Not with rage, as in Harrison's office, but with deep, crushing, quiet grief. All the months of suppressed regret and shame burst out in choking sobs. I was so obsessed with the money. She whispered through her tears. I was so blind. I never saw how much she truly loved us both. I traded her love for an inheritance that, it turns out, I didn't even deserve. I hesitated for only a moment, then reached across the table and covered her trembling hand with my own. Margaret believed that people could change, Olivia. Until her very last day, she believed. She hoped that this painful collapse would teach you what, to her greatest regret, her boundless generosity could not. Olivia slowly looked up at me, her eyes red and full of despair, but there was something new in them. A timid resolve. Is there any way? She asked hesitantly. Can I work for you? I'll do anything. Mop the floors. Get coffee. I want to learn the business. I want to prove that I can be someone more than just her spoiled disappointment. I looked out the window. I thought about Margaret's final wish for reconciliation. About her hope that family was something more than blood. Our London office, I said slowly, actually needs a property management assistant. It's the most entry-level position. The salary is very modest, the hours are long, but you really would learn everything from the ground up. The hope on her face was so bright it was almost painful. She immediately nodded, straightening her back as if taking an oath. I'll take it. I'll do it. Thank you, Maddie. She took a deep breath. Thank you for giving me a chance to become someone grandmother could be proud of. As we sat together in the silence of the fading day, I understood what Margaret's true, final plan was. Her greatest victory was not in punishing Olivia for her greed. It was in creating one last, desperate opportunity for the genuine healing of our broken family. A healing built on earned respect, not on empty assumptions about blood. Olivia's attempt to challenge Margaret's will in court had predictable consequences. Her lawsuit not only failed at every level but also completely exhausted her resources. Chasing what didn't belong to her cost her all $6 million of her inheritance, her social standing, and her reputation. She had to face the harsh reality: her entire life had been built on unearned privilege, not personal achievement. 2 years later, I stood in our new office in Barcelona. The carefully built empire Margaret had created had not just been preserved, it had grown, and the portfolio was now valued at over $50 million. Margaret's plan was not about punishment, but a lesson. Olivia received consequences that forced her to confront the truth. As I signed contracts for a new project in Singapore, I finally understood what the real victory was. It wasn't in watching my sister lose. It was in proving, every single day, that I was worthy of the incredible trust Margaret had placed in me.